Welcome to another episode of the Buzzalong Cycling Podcast. Join me as we dive into the world of adventure cycling, bikepacking, and ultra cycling. I'm your host, Sherry. Today, joining us from Idaho, United States, is Lauren Brownlee. Welcome to the show, Lauren.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Lauren not only knows a lot about bikepacking, but she was also the first woman across the line in Tour de Bike 2021, right? That's impressive. How was
Thank
your
you.
experience during this race? I mean, it was your first one. Doing this kind of race and coming first woman across the line is truly an achievement.
Yeah, that was pretty huge. I had no idea that I was capable of that. I went in hoping to do well, but I had no idea I was gonna win. And it was a huge learning process. That race is a beast, and yeah, I had to learn a lot along the way and overcome a lot, but I was really proud of myself with how that went.
That's awesome. You also do a lot of bikepacking trips. Today we're gonna touch on bikepacking in US, a bit of gravel, and also maybe you can reveal some of your secrets for motivation for this kind of events.
I don't know if I have any secrets, but yeah, ask away.
But I'm curious, Lauren, how did you get into long distance cycling and bikepacking? I mean, did you just take your bike and decided to sign up for a long event, or how did you start it?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm a little crazy, but I think whenever I hear of something that people tell me is unachievable or just crazy, that is the kind of thing that really gets my attention. So when I first heard of the Tour Divide, it was probably like 2015 or so. I I knew I was going to do it one day. And yeah, I mean, I did like really short stuff leading up to that. I got into gravel cycling probably only like 2 years before I did the Tour Divide. Maybe 3 years before that. Yeah, 3 years before I did the Tour Divide. Um, but then I did a few gravel events and then I said, okay, I'm ready. And I dove headfirst. And yeah, I had to learn a lot out there. Um, but yeah, it was knowing that I wanted to do the biggest thing and the hardest thing I could imagine and something that sounded too hard to do, but yeah.
Yeah, with many Europeans towing the line this year, it's insane. Like a lot of Europeans participating this year in the Tour Divide, which is currently on, starting 9th of June, I think.
hmm
But can you explain maybe the listeners who don't know about the race what it is?
Sure. So it is a 2,700 mile bike packing race that starts in Banff, Canada, and goes down. It sort of follows the Continental Divide as closely as possible, mostly on dirt roads, and it ends at the border of the US and Mexico. Um, and so it's mostly dirt roads, but there is some single track, and then there's also some pavement. So it's like, as far as mountain bikes go, it's a lot faster than that, but obviously a lot slower than road riding. There's actually another like uh, ultra distance road race going on right now called the Trans Am, which goes from the West Coast to the East Coast. And that's a road riding event. And so there are also some Europeans out there who are crushing it and doing some insane numbers of miles. So it's kind of cool because the two routes do intersect. I think somewhere in Montana, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's really interesting. I'm actually thinking about doing Trans Am one day and Tour Divide, so
Oh, you
I have both
should.
in my bucket list.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, that's
And
amazing.
yeah, and so the sort of the premise of the Tour Divide is it's a self-supported bikepacking race, which means that there are no aid stations, and you have to rely on services that are commercially available. So you are allowed to get hotel rooms. You can go to restaurants. You can go to gas stations to buy all your food, but you cannot count on the support of any other people. And that includes like having friends come out to visit you on the course. You just you need to tell your friends to stay away. That's one of the rules.
Yeah, and for example, talking about resupplies, I guess you get into really remote areas. It's not like road racing that you bump into a village. There's gas stations there. You
Mm-hmm.
have to carry a lot of resupplies. How do you manage that? I don't know. I cannot think like what's the longest stretch you had without any resupplies during the event?
I think it would probably be the Great Basin in Wyoming. Uh, you go maybe 150 miles without resupply. I don't know if that number's right, but yeah, you're just in this like desert, and there are wild horses everywhere, and like there's not a lot of water. I think there's one spring pretty close to where you like enter the Great Basin, and um, yeah, it gets pretty remote. And so, yeah, you have to carry a lot of water, carry a lot of food, and just pack up your bike. And I think that one of the things that was useful for me was carrying a backpack. So when I did have those really long stretches, I could fill it up with like a bunch of burritos and granola bars so that I would have enough calories to get across the Great Basin.
Wow, that sounds like a real challenge. But also, in terms of wildlife, you mentioned the wild horses, but in Europe, we hear a lot of stories about bears. I mean, it's something like, in Europe, you don't imagine bumping into a bear. How do you cope mentally with that, or how do you prepare yourself? I don't know. I don't know what I would do if I knew there was a bear around.
You know, the bears are pretty scary. Yeah, all the way from where you start down to basically to the Great Basin, you have to carry bear spray. Um, so if you do run into a grizzly bear, you have a deterrent, something that you can spray at it to make it stop attacking you if it looks like it's going to attack you. Um, yeah, but mentally, I think you it's pretty hard. But I think carrying bear spray is good. Knowing how to use bear spray is also something that maybe I didn't know for a long time. Even like while I was carrying it, I didn't know, but I have since learned how to use it. And I practiced using it one time. Um, and that actually really helped me a lot in knowing like what I would do if I did run into an aggressive grizzly. Um, on the divide, I actually didn't, when I did the race, I didn't see any, but I saw a lot of signs of grizzlies. And there was one night I was going over Richmond Pass, and I was going up the road, and the sun was going down, and I ran into this car, and there were two guys sitting up there with their binoculars, and they're like, "Oh, what you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm just biking. What you doing?" They're like, "Oh, we're bear hunting." And they're like, "We have never seen so many grizzlies out here." And I said, "Okay, I'm gonna keep moving." um, and so, yeah, I kept moving, and that was one of my longer nights on the divide. It was pretty early on into the race, but I did not want to sleep anywhere where there was a lot of grizzly activity. So I pushed on probably till like 3 a.m. that night to get out of grizzly country. And I still wasn't out of it where I slept. Um, but yeah, not right where the bear hunters were. Um,
Uh,
yeah.
wow, that sounds like a lot of things to have in consideration, I will say. So,
Yeah.
what would be an advice that you give to somebody thinking about doing the Tour de White for the first time? I don't know, like, did you research the route, or how did you prepare? Because I guess it's quite difficult being your first long distance race and such a challenging one. Not only the terrain, but also the weather conditions. You have quite
Mm-hmm.
extreme weather conditions over there, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that the whole thing is just such a puzzle. It's like both fitness and like your mental fortitude, and then also knowing the route and knowing what to expect, knowing how to handle like the hard stuff that comes, like knowing how to handle mechanicals, um, and then just sort of rolling with the punches and trusting your gear, trusting yourself. Um, so yeah, I think as far as like advice, um, I would say that one of the ways I felt the most prepared was having a stash of, in my mind, a stash of really hard rides I had gotten through. So I sometimes say, "Oh, it's raining, I'm not going to go for a ride." But sometimes I say, "It's raining, I should go for a ride." And really just putting yourself into like some of these harder situations. Um, and I mean, I've just continued, like, even since the divide, like, continued, like, building this sort of Rolodex. And you're like, oh, okay, like, it's hailing right now. I can go back and remember, oh, that awful ride I did, like going up the mountain when it was hailing on me, when I like didn't have any more food, and like I can remember that one specific ride and say, well, if I got through that, I can get through this. Like, you just,
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. The same. Like every time there's a tough ride, I thought about another one that was even worse. I was like, "Ah, it can be worse than normally Transiberica." It's like after that
yeah,
race, I was like, ah, it can be worse than Transiberica. And it kind
right.
of helps you
It
go
really
through
helps
that
you,
moment.
yeah, being able to say, well, I got through that, I can get through this. Or if it's like the hardest thing you've ever done, then you say, well, I guess this will go in the Rolodex. And the next thing I do won't ever be nearly as hard as this.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I don't know. I tend to romanticize these experiences. After that you think about it, and it's like, oh, it was great. I was suffering, but it was the best moment of my life when I got out of there, or when I reached the top of the mountain. I don't know. It really sticks in your mind, like something you definitely remember.
Yeah, definitely remember, but I think also on those races it helps to just keep moving forward and like try to forget. Like if you just had a shitty day, you're like, well, tomorrow will be better. Like, and even, I don't know, one of my friends gave me the advice, be like a goldfish. And so goldfishes only have a memory of like 7 seconds. So even if the last 7 seconds were the worst 7 seconds of your life, like you just forget that and keep moving forward and just focus on how you feel at that moment, not how you've been feeling. So that kind of helps you get out of like, I don't know, if you're having a hard time.
Yeah, exactly. What I find also, a lot of people say that they have the lowest moments during the night. A lot of people say, "Okay, I'm gonna scratch," but I heard best advice is like just take a nap, take some rest, and then
Yeah.
decide after that. I think that's very valuable. There's some times in the night that you just feel like, "Oh, I cannot do this anymore," but just take a rest and then restart with a fresh mindset. Did it ever happen to you, like a moment that you felt like, oh, I can't continue, I'm gonna scratch, and then you took some time and then evaluated things and said, okay, I can keep on pushing?
You know, shockingly, scratching never crossed my mind during that race. I think it was probably the motivation of that being my first bike packing race ever. I just I had all the motivation in the world and I knew I needed to finish it for myself. And I think, like, looking back, that was a little naive actually, because there are just so many reasons that someone would need to scratch. Like, if you're having health issues or if your bike breaks. I mean, there are just so many ways that, like, um, you might need to get off trail, or something out of your own control that happens, um, like outside of biking. I don't know. There are just so many reasons, but going into the race, I said, no matter what, I'm going to finish it. And I think in a lot of the bike packing races since then, I have definitely had those moments where I'm like, oh, I might scratch, I might need to scratch, like, I don't know about this, or my head's not in the right space. But usually, then I just eat some food and take a nap and then continue on.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Makes the world of difference indeed. It's like I don't know, a personal challenge. It's called a race, but I think you mentioned it before in another podcast. It's a race that you have people around you that you are competing with, but it's really a race against yourself. So that's just the extra motivation you need to really push your limits, right?
Right, yeah. And then riding alongside people who also started at the same time as you and who are experiencing either the same stuff or like sort of different stuff, just weather or like how their body's feeling, or how their bike is working. But I mean, we're all out there on the same course, and it is really motivating to like be able to ride with people or try to chase someone down or try to stay ahead of someone. It does help a lot to know there are other people out there.
Yeah, indeed. And you've been doing some more racing since then. I see you had a pretty busy calendar. So, which ones did you do? I think you did Unbound and some other races in the area.
Yeah, so actually, before I did the divide, I did Unbound 200, which was a gravel race. And I think that was a good test of my fitness beforehand. But to be honest with you, when I finished that ride, I had inhaled so much dust that I thought my lungs weren't going to be working by the time I needed to show up to the starting line of the divide. And then also like just so much dust had gotten into my bike that like my bottom bracket was making some awful sounds, and I was like pretty worried about my bike, but I mean, it just ended up needed cleaned my bottom bracket. Um, so I think that was the biggest threat to me even getting to the starting line of the divide, but I did. Um, and and then and then I did the divide, and then I was kind of hooked on bike pack races, and so I've done a handful since. I did a 300-mile race called the Big Lonely in Bend, and then I did a few races in Arizona last year. Um, I attempted the Colorado Trail Race, which is
Hmm.
um, that was my first scratch. I had a mechanical that caused me to scratch out of that race, and then I continued touring it sort of in my own style of riding, and I didn't stick to the full course. I like got off course where I wanted to and just turned that into a fun little tour, and still got to like ride a lot of really beautiful mountain biking in Colorado. And then the last race I did was Smoke and Fire, which is a local race in Boise, which is a 400-mile route that starts and ends like in my neighborhood.
Yeah, that sounds really nice. I think that's great because you can explore so many beautiful places. I mean, most of the places I race in, like I would never have gone there, right? It's like, oh, I didn't know this place existed, but it's like I don't know, magical at that moment.
Yeah, no, it's so cool. Like, I mean, it's cool to push your body, but also to cover just so much distance that you probably wouldn't be able to cover if you weren't in this like racing mindset. Um, but yeah, it's pretty mind-boggling to be able to just traverse so much land just self-propelled on your bicycle.
Indeed. And for example, you did Unbound, which is like a short, fast paced race. How does it compare to the other long distance events? It's also like much more, let's say, people are quite competitive and it's more about racing than the experience itself. How does it compare for you?
Yeah, no, you're totally right. It's super different. Yeah, I think like gravel has really grown in the US, and it's gotten faster and faster. And you're seeing like a lot of pros getting into it. I mean, there are way into it now. Um, yeah, it's a really competitive atmosphere, and I have just really found a lot of joy in the bike pack races because it's just such a community focused event that you're showing up to, and you don't feel like you're racing against the person next to you. You feel like you're working together to get up this climb. You're like motivating each other. You're you're chatting about where the next like spring is to refill your water bottles. You don't feel like the person next to you is like your enemy. Whereas when you show up to Unbound, yeah, like you are trying to drop the person next to you. You're trying to chase down the next person. Yeah, it's definitely a different mentality.
Yeah, on that point, this year on Tour Divide, we have quite a lot ex-professionals or professional racers. Do you think that's changing the scene? I don't know. For me, it's as you mentioned, it's not about racing other people. It's about a challenge and the community feeling that people stay. You share the stories after that. You bump into each other at night and have a chat. Do you think that's changing a little bit?
You know, it's actually really interesting to watch that unfold. I have a bunch of friends out there, and um, like everyone is sort of like watching to see how these pros do because, I mean, obviously they're used to much shorter distances, and then to do such ultra distances, you have to go a lot slower. And I don't know if I don't know if road cyclists always know how to pace themselves. Um, and like do a pace that you can keep up for like 15 days or however long they're shooting for. It's very interesting, but I think it's been cool to see the Instagram stories of like everyone who's out there racing, and it looks like Ted King is learning a lot of lessons about yeah, bike pack racing, and it seems like he's truly embracing it. And I mean, I guess he also has done other bike pack races, and he knows what he's doing. But I mean, the Tour Divide is just so different, and it's kind of cool to see ex pros towing the line and getting a reality check of how different like uh, road racing is to bike pack racing.
Indeed, I find there's a lot about the mental element. How much are you willing to suffer, and how much you want it? Sometimes you can keep going, but your mind tells you, try to find excuses to stop, and then you just have to tell yourself, oh, okay, how much do I want to complete this race? Or as you said, it's like for myself. Like how much I want this challenge, especially as your first one, I had the same feeling. It's like no matter what, if my bike works, I'm gonna finish this event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. And for example, how do you train for these kind of events? Do you do any specific training or just bike packing trips? I heard you were living before in a van, like combining it with bike touring. Is that true?
Yeah, so yes, I lived in a van for close to 5 years, and that was a pretty cool way to live because I could just travel around in the mountains and park in a new spot every couple days and go figure out like all the best bike bike routes to do from there. That was super fun, but yeah, I didn't really have a whole lot of structured training leading up to the divide. I just rode um, what felt good. So some days I wouldn't, if I felt like I needed to take a break, I wouldn't shy away from taking a rest day. But yeah, leading up to the divide, I rode a lot and I did big back-to-back days a whole lot.
Yeah, not but not only training, also like preparing, like your bike, for example, your equipment. Did you do any like kind of a specific research, or you had like a packing list of like essential items besides the bear spray?
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of research, and there are a lot of resources out there about what is best to bring on both a bike pack race or a bike pack tour. And so I took all of that information into account. And I had actually done a lot of backpacking before, so I knew how to like pack small and pack light. But yeah, I mean, like looking back on the setup that I had on the Tour Divide, there are definitely a lot of things I've changed since then. And I think if I had gone on more smaller bikepacking races beforehand, then I would have had a much more dialed kit than I did at the start of the Divide. But you live and you learn. I'm sure I'll be back someday and do it again, and hopefully do it a lot faster with all of the knowledge that I have.
Yeah, you already smashed it. So, but indeed, you learn so much with every race. I think ultra racing is about experience. You see the very experienced guys. You don't have to be the strongest rider. You can just play your strength. And I love the fact that you can kind of perform really well and not be the fastest of the strongest, but just have your strategy, and everybody can have a different setup, and you can just be yourself and be part of these kind of events.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, you're seeing that a lot already just in the Divide right now. If you're following track leaders, like everyone has different strengths, and like the front of the pack, it's so awesome to watch. Like some of them have a way faster moving average speed, and then some people are just sleeping less. Some people are better at climbing, some people are better at flats. Like it's cool to see that all play out.
And what things did you change in your setup that you will say will make a huge difference? Can you talk us through your setup, like your tire choice? I think sometimes that's one of the things people wonder, like what's the tire choice for this kind of event?
Well, so I showed up to the Divide. I had a gravel bike because that's the bike that I had.
Oh.
And so when I was living in a van, I had limited space. So, you need a bike that does everything. And so for me, that was a gravel bike. And I actually had pretty skinny tires, and I showed up to the starting line and I got a lot of feedback about how skinny my tires were. And to me, I didn't like that. Just some big old men telling me that, oh, you're never gonna make it because your tires are so skinny. And that kind of feedback is kind of fuel for me. It helped me whenever I was having a low day. I'm like, well, I just need to stay ahead and prove to these people who thought I could never make it that I would make it, and and I would beat them. But yeah, so I think now I have since gotten a more adventure ready suited bike, and I have seen what comfort can do in these long races. By the end of the Divide, like I had a lot of like nerve damage in my hands, and my like back and shoulders were just very rattled. And I remember in New Mexico, I was sort of I was more looking forward to the climbs than the descents, because the descents were just like rattling my body so much. And that's not how cycling is supposed to be. And so since then, I have gotten a much more comfortable bike. I have like way bigger tires, and I sometimes even ride with suspension now. Yeah, so I think that comfort would actually translate to more speed. It might not be the faster bike in climbing, but I think in the long haul, it would be the faster choice and the more comfortable choice, and help me like not feel quite as rattled. And it was pretty funny. I took that gravel bike out the other day, and I went down some like kind of chunky, rocky section around here, and I just like sat there after that little section, and I was shocked. I'm like, I can't believe I rode the entire Divide on this bike. And I mean, back then, that was my only bike. It's all I knew, and that's like what I thought was comfortable for me. And I mean, realistically, like, it is a faster bike, but I think comfort does take you a little bit further on such long events.
I totally agree. I changed my setup also. I had like a rim brake bike that I was scared to go on descents, and then I
Right.
changed like a disc brake endurance bike, and I was like, oh my god, that's a game changer. As you said, like I couldn't believe I would do these kind of things on the other bike, but you live, you learn. So every event you improve your setup, and it's quite fun. I don't know. One of my favorite parts is like looking out for gadgets and see what can improve, what I can change on my setup. I think that's the good thing about these kind of events. There's no one setup for all. You can always improve and change things.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. And for example, what do you think about bikepacking routes in the US besides the Tour de Bike route? Any favorite ones that you say, oh, if you ever visit, you have to check this one out?
Oh, wow. I mean, there are just so many. I think, well, I haven't done the whole thing, but so Smoke and Fire is like a 400-mile loop around here, but that takes a little bit from the Idaho Hot Springs loop, and that's an even longer distance, and it sort of travels in between the hot springs. So I haven't done that as a whole, but I've definitely ridden a lot of the sections of it, and so it's pretty cool because you can bike and bike and bike, and then you finish your day at a hot springs, you camp there, then keep biking the next day, end up at a hot springs.
Wow, that sounds like a nice day out on the bike. Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess there is better to just bring a gravel bike or a mountain bike, right? I don't think road riding in US is the
Oh,
best option.
yeah. I mean, you can get into such beautiful wild places when you are off the road. And then I think also safety wise, I feel more and more comfortable not being on road these days. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a bit different that here in Europe, but I feel now that I did road races that I did a couple of like more adventurous trips that I want to go more into like off-road events because as you said, you can go into more beautiful places, quiet, just being in nature, and it's also more challenging. I don't know, there's an element of you feel that it is more adventurous, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it also is pretty interesting on some of these more adventurous rides. You do end up pushing your bike a lot, like and doing a hike a bike, and that's that's a cool experience too, where you're like, wow, I can't even ride my bike here, but I'm still self-propelling myself through this like ridiculously challenging terrain. Yeah, and you're just pushing your bike up a mountain.
Yeah, I had an experience like this in Transiberica last year. It was supposed to be a road race, but it's self-routed. So we took a hike-by shortcut through the Pyrenees. I thought it
Wow.
would be like 5 kilometers, but it ended up being like 20K. I was like, oh my God, you actually had to put your bike on your shoulder. I was like, we will never go out of this place. But when we reached the top, I don't know, it was like a sensation of ecstasy. I don't know, like I never felt so happy in my life. It felt like I was in a dream and somehow like alive again. Like wow, that was
That's so
definitely an
cool.
experience. Yeah, yeah, indeed. We'll never have gone there otherwise. I think.
Right.
Yeah, and for example, in these events, like because it's self-supported, it also forces you to interact more with your environment, and also to learn about the places you're riding through. Do you find this also? Like I don't know, interacting with the locals, you have to learn about how everything works, where the shops are, how's the terrain, where are you gonna find water.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, especially with finding water, you have to sort of understand, you have to like look at maps more carefully, and there's this element of you never know. So sometimes there will be a creek on a map and there won't actually be a creek there. Um, and yeah, you definitely have to, you're just at the mercy of the land when you're in such wild places. And then that also does mean that you're not at the mercy of people, but you are just so thankful for all the people along the route. And people, you find yourself like in some very desolate lands. And if you see a truck coming by, you are shocked. And I've just had only great experiences with people when I've been bike packing. Just everyone's so nice, and usually it's just sort of this sense of like people see you and they're just like, what the heck are you doing? Like, why are you out here? How many days ago did you start? And it's amazing what we do, and you kind of forget it because you're like surrounded by other people doing like the insane things that you're doing. But then you meet a stranger who who just is like, that's all you need is everything on your bike. Like, how far have you come? Where did you start? And you're like, oh yeah, what I'm doing is crazy.
Yeah, I did. A lot of people looks at you like, I don't know, I cannot believe what she's telling me.
Yeah, yep.
And what's next for you, Lauren? Any events in the calendar for this year?
Yeah, so I did so many events last year that I'm taking it a little bit easier this year, and hopefully regenerating so I can maybe do a few harder things next year. But this year I'm actually like prepping my bike right now. There's this challenge in Boise, which is where I'm living right now, to do all the mountain biking trails here. Um, and so I think it's a total of like 170 miles of mountain bike trails. But I have created a route where you do all of them in one single ride. And um, yeah, my total route will be 260 miles. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, it's basically all mountain biking. So it's going to be a lot of climbing, a lot of descending. Um, yeah, and it's a challenge, so it's not a race, but a lot of people do try to do it pretty fast. So there will be some competition if we're treating
Yeah.
it like a race. um, yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. And then I'm going to do a 24-hour race in a month. And then I have nothing else on the schedule.
Oh, taking it easy this year, then
Yeah,
a bit more relaxing. I think that's good. Sometimes you can cramp the agenda too much. I think
yeah.
it's sometimes hard to recover from, I don't know, from one race to another. You do your first ultra race, then you get so excited that you want to do the next one, but then you realize you sign up for too many races. Like, wow, I'm not sure how I can recover in between those events. Did you find that last year that you had quite a busy agenda that it was hard to recover in between races?
Yes, definitely. I definitely had a hard time recovering between races. Um, yeah, just like I also in the shorter bike packing races, I don't sleep a lot. And in Smoke and Fire, which was the last race I did, I hardly slept at all. I went 2.5 days without sleeping. Um, and that's really hard on the body and the mind. And I mean, I was fatigued for probably like a month or longer. Just, just taking, my body just was not very happy with that little sleep. So I think it's important to not create long-term harm to my brain uh, by doing too many no sleep races. So yeah, taking it a little easier this year.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think I should do that. I signed up for too many events this year. I'm already like, oof, I'm not sure if I can manage all of them.
But you
And
know, we're
Lauren,
hooked, you know?
huh?
We're hooked.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. There's something, I don't know how to describe it. People say it's crazy, and you wonder, like, it was painful, you cry, but when you finish, you can't wait to do it again. I don't know what it is about it.
I don't know
It seems a
either,
bit
but
crazy.
we have the same experience, yeah.
Yeah, indeed. But I love it. The community, as you mentioned, we are all so different and we experience the races in such a different ways. But at the end, like kind of, there's a lot of feelings and moments that when you speak to other riders, you can really relate to.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's great. And for example, Lauren, I mean, you contact me when you saw my video about race around the Netherlands on Instagram. It's actually the first time we talk in person. But I'm wondering, what's your thoughts about media crews in this kind of unsupported events? Or it's changing quite a lot. It's great that now we are able to see and kind of experience this event, but does it change a bit the spirit of the event, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I don't have any answers for how it should be, but I think it is so cool what you have done, which is like sharing your story, but also doing it by yourself. Like you have taken it upon yourself to set up the camera and talk to the camera and get all the shots you want and like really tell the true story of like what's going on out there while you're racing, which I mean, to anyone who's never done a bike packing race, it's so interesting. And it's also, you cannot even imagine, you cannot even fathom like what the racers are going through. And so I think like social media is awesome because like if it wasn't for social media, I don't know if I would have heard of any of these races. Um, and like the sport is growing probably because like social media. And yeah, I really appreciate what you have done. And I think that that is one of the ways to do it. And I also don't think that media crews are in the spirit of self supported bike packing. And so like I said, one of the rules about like the Tour Divide is your friends aren't allowed to visit you, and that rule sort of started because like if your friends visit you, they're gonna bring you like banana bread or something, they're gonna and refill your waters, which isn't really allowed. And it's just unfair to everyone else out there. Just if your friends are like always along the route. And so that also just ends up being emotional support as well. So just like knowing that you have a friend or a loved one, like, I don't know, 20 miles up the road, that's really going to give you a huge advantage to just keep pushing and like, I don't know, get there faster. Um, and then yeah, so I don't know. I think like having a loved one on course is definitely an advantage. I have never experienced that, but I did even notice that when I was doing the Tour Divide, even when there were dot watchers who just knew my name, someone who I had never met before, and they told me I was doing great, like that was incredible. That's such a boost. And just imagining like extrapolating sort of, wow, like what if I had like my parents there or a loved one there or like some of my best friends like along the course. I think that that would be a huge advantage. And then as far as media crews go, I think that it also does change the nature of what you're doing. And part of it is knowing that there's someone waiting for you somewhere. So you can take just different kinds of risks that you normally wouldn't be able to because you're in a remote place. Like when I was racing in Colorado, like my brother lives in Boulder, and so I had this sense of safety knowing that okay, well, if I get into like a serious medical emergency, I do have someone who is probably 6 hours away, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But if there was a media crew there taking a video of me, then they would always be what, maybe an hour away. And so that would allow me to take some very different risks that I wasn't able to. And I mean, like, even even having my brother in Colorado, that's so different than like when I was racing the Tour Divide. It's like, yeah, I know people along in each state, but at sometimes you might be like 10 hours away from your closest loved one. And so I don't know. It definitely changes the nature of like how you can take risks and how hard you can ride, and just yeah, it just changes what
Yeah,
you
indeed.
think you can do.
I agree with your points. Is one thing is to document your journey and share it and inspire others to do the same. And another one, if you are racing solo and self-supported, and then you have a media crew, it does, in my opinion, give you emotional. Maybe not to everyone, but at least for me, I will feel also, as you say, like a safe,
Mm-hmm.
and I will be willing to take more risks. So, but it's great that people share their journey, themselves. You can do it yourself. It doesn't have to be like professional to inspire people. I find the raw things, when you see the pains and the real stuff, is the one that, at least to me, inspires me, because it's like, oh, okay, it's real. That's what happened. When you follow the dot, it's like you wonder what happened there, and then you see the updates on social media. It's like, that's quite funny. Also, as you said, now with the pro cyclists going into the races, and a lot of them are active on social media, so they post a lot of what is going on in the race.
Yeah, no, I've really appreciated all of my friends who are posting on Instagram on the Tour Divide, because yeah, I mean the dot that you see on track leaders, you just see when it moves and when it stops, and you don't know much else. And so like seeing, oh, the mechanicals that my friends are dealing with, or the amazing like handful of food that they got at the gas station, like you're like, oh wow, that's why they stopped, is because they got an entire pizza. So yeah, I also try to keep my Instagram stories like pretty updated when I'm doing these races, because it's fun for me. It's like I get to like interact with the outside world a little bit like while I'm on these races, but I also know that it's a story that people are interested in. And I was interested in that before I started racing. I just ate it all up. I was like, what is it like out there? And now I get to share what it actually is like out there.
Yeah, indeed. So, people, follow Lauren for more adventures. We're looking forward to see you in the next adventures. And for your challenge, is there any tracking link, or is just like you just follow the routes for your upcoming challenge?
Oh yeah, so they actually link that challenge to Strava, and so there's not like a live tracker of my location, but every time I upload a ride, it will turn the map, like all the trails that I've done, it'll turn those green. So I think that's BoiseTrailsChallenge.com probably.
Great. So I will leave your Instagram in the description and show notes so people can follow your adventures. Thank you so much, Lauren. It's been a pleasure to have you in the show. And yeah, looking forward to see your updates and upcoming trips and adventures.
Great, thank you so much.